Welcome to How to Be the Difference with your hosts, Johanna and Paul. A podcast for the career you want, or maybe just that push you need. If you want to know what your dream career looks like, join us to get inspiration from industry experts that will make that dream career a reality.
Hello, and you're very welcome along to How to Be the Difference. This is part 2 of our holiday bonanza. My name is Paul Lynskey, and
Johanna Molina.
We are joined together here. We are sitting on different sides of the planet in front of an open fire currently at the moment. Is it still the holiday season? I think it is. It's just about the new year, isn't it?
Yes. It's still the holiday season. I still have my Christmas tree and everything up. I will just wait until later in January. And today's episode is to help us start the year with the right foot, essentially inspired with all the energy for this year to be a really, really successful in every single area of our lives.
Love that. That's a great start. And the first guest we have, and I absolutely love this one, we had an absolute blast talking to Dr. Mandeep Ray. That was episode 8. And she's the best-selling author of The Values Compass, what 101 countries teach us about purpose, life, and leadership. Johanna, a little outside the podcast kind of talk here. Johanna, when you were on your European trip, where you didn't stop in Ireland, by the way, but when you were on your European trip, mostly to England, you met up with Dr. Mandeep Ray.
Yes. We became friends after the episode, and we met up in London. And yes, I have her digital copy of the book and also her physical signed copy of the book, which is fantastic. And this is a very beautiful episode. We hope you enjoy it.
How do you end up where you are today, known as a global authority on values?
Wow. So firstly, I would say that none of this has been planned. So for anyone who's listening, who's thinking, what do I do with my life? Not to worry. Just take the best step you can each and every time. And my aim was simply to follow my values without really realizing it. I realized that I needed to follow my values as soon as I realized that I wasn't following my values. And then I had to course correct. And I think I've just course corrected every time there's been a shift in me, and then I've shifted the environment around me to match those values. So for example, my values at times have been very much freedom and exploration, as you've just witnessed over the last month, and as you'll witness in the next month. But that doesn't mean that there aren't times of real stability and concentration and hunkering down. And so there are times when you need to finish something or produce something, or you have a real creative urge, and you should honor that. And there are times when you really need to, be adventurous, set free, and create the ideas at that time, and then honor that. Now, I'm not saying that we all necessarily have the freedom to do what we want to do whenever we want to do it, but we can try and choose the right environment for ourselves. So, for example, when I was younger, the right environment for me was definitely roaming correspondent, journalism. I wanted to see how the world worked, to seek the truth as much as I could, and to really just to see everything and experience everything, which I think most of the Gen Z and millennials would relate to. And then there came a stage, like I remember, falling pregnant, for example. And then my focus really shifted to how do I teach or give the next generation everything possible? How do I give them all the wisdom of the world? There are times when, for example, when I did my MBA, when I knew, because I was setting up this venture capital fund, that I wanted to upskill myself, that I wanted to give myself a better grounding and understanding, and vernacular, semantics, words, jargon that would be suitable for that time. So each and every step, I just reassessed and thought about what was required or what's the best thing I could do at this point. And that's how I'm here. And where is here? We're always on a journey. We're never at the final destination. Even on your last day, I don't think you're at the final destination, or who knows what that destination is. And to be open to growing, at least that's again one of my core values. I hope that I am constantly learning and growing and appreciating, kind of cherishing what I'm experiencing.
Amazing. We would love to have you educate us on values. So our values, we're born with values, we change, you are mentioning, we change with values. What are values like? Do you change them throughout your life? What is the difference between those values and principles and skills? How do you improve them?
Great question. So values are really a combination of nature and nurture, but they can also be a combination of choice and reaction. So initially we are reacting to our circumstances, we're reacting to what's happening to us, you know, it's a reaction to, it's a reaction to. And at some point, definitely in adult life, like after, I would say there are a few critical points as you're growing up. Normally, before the age of 10, something quite substantial has happened that already frames your viewpoint on life to some degree. Then definitely by around the age of 13, you'll have a moment where you feel, I'm not sure I belong, or I'm not sure, what do I need to do to fit in, or this sense of, a human sense of wanting to belong kicks in. Many of us have moments where we think, I'm not sure I'm good enough even. What do I need to do? Or what do I need to do to survive? What are and each and every time those critical moments happen, and they're different for all of us, but they happen pretty much to all of us, up to the age of 18, you'll find that you're shaping yourself. You make decisions. Some people, for example, like I'll give an example. If you it's not traumatic, but it could be traumatic to you. If you found that there was a moment at school where you were told, very publicly to be quiet, or you found that you were applauded when you spoke up, you might decide at that point, I better stay quiet. I better keep my voice low, or I better make sure that I raise my voice because that works. Like, you make little decisions. This works, this doesn't. This works, this doesn't. Now, over time, they can become your hacks, your tricks, or your values. A value is what you really hold close to you, what really motivates you, what really matters to you, what you really value, essentially, like in the most basic of terms. Now, when you turn 18, or at whatever stage you decide that you are now going to make a conscious decision, that there's a choice, that every single time something happens, I deliberately take a breath at that point, because every single time something happens, you can take a breath and you can make a choice. And at that point, or before that point even, the values compass encourages you to take a process to really identify what really matters to you, your core values. So as you take that breath, what can help is, and this is actually what the values compass really helps with, is for you to identify what truly matters to you, your core values. And once you've done that, it's almost as though you are equipping yourself with your own personal compass, with your own, north, south, east, west. You can navigate yourself because you've chosen, one, what matters, and two, you've prioritized what matters. And that makes a huge difference, because if you put everything at equal pegging. You've decided, 5 things matter, but they're all equally important. Well, then again, your compass is not going to work so much, because which one of those 5 do you choose at any given point? But when you take a breath and you actually have already, before you've taken that breath, in the moment that you went through the process, have decided what number 1 is in this period of time, what's number 2, 3, 4, 5, and what would serve you best according to what you think is important, then it does create, as His Holiness said, a greater kind of sense of harmony in your decision making, a greater sense of, or even in your life, because you're going by kind of your inner guide. You're being led and focused by your inner guide. And also you've decided it's an active choice rather than just reacting to what happens from your automatic or always, you're always from your automatic reactions, from the way you normally are triggered and the way you normally react. So you're stepping away from that.
Next up is Andres Barretto. He is the managing director at Techstars. I've known Andres for 10 years, I think. And he's a serial entrepreneur, very, very inspirational, with loads of success as an entrepreneur, and now helping other entrepreneurs also be successful. He's going to be sharing with us his entrepreneurial journey. A lot of great advice here for you. Enjoy it.
Absolutely. From episode 9, Andreas Barretto.
Tell us a little bit about your career, Andres. Tell us how did your journey start from the beginning, like a little bit about your background.
Yeah, sure thing. So I'm originally from Colombia, and when I was 12, I moved to the US. I moved to Florida and to Miami, and I did middle school and high school there. And for college, I applied and got into the engineering school at the University of Florida. And I remember, because I'm a minority, I'm a Latino in the US. There's not a lot of Latino engineers or Black engineers in the US because the system's designed to weed us out. And I remember that I went through a pre-university program for minorities. And it was a little bit discouraging, because the statistics were, and we were sitting all in an auditorium, and I think the Dean of Engineering told us the reality of the statistics, which were, if you look to your left and you look to your right in this large auditorium, only one of you is going to make it. And then my first semester in calculus, I had a professor that was proud of only passing 10% of the students, that his class was so hard that only the top 10% of students passed calculus. And that's when I started realizing that the system is designed incorrectly. Imagine if you're a pilot and you said, or an airline, and you said, we only land 10% of the time. The others, we fail. Some 90% of the time the airplanes crash. Well, that's how education was set up in terms of my experience in engineering. And so, of course, I failed out of engineering and I ended up studying political science, primarily because at the time that I had to switch majors, because I got kicked out of engineering, I couldn't get into the business school because I didn't have calculus. I couldn't get into journalism because I already lost 2 semesters. So it was too late for me to get into journalism. By the time I had done all that, I had created already my first technology company, and I had 30 employees. And I knew that not studying engineering was not going to deter me from building technology. And I figured, all right, well, if school doesn't want me to study engineering, that's fine. If the school doesn't want to let me study business, that's fine, because I'm doing engineering and I'm doing business. So I want to be a journalist. The school didn't let me do that because I was missing all the credits. So I created a media company to be my own journalist. And I figured, all right, so if I have my own media company, I already have my tech company, I'm doing the things that I was supposed to study, I'm learning by doing, then what is something that is intellectually interesting that I'll probably never get to apply, but it's still interesting to learn? And that was political science. So by the time I finished college, I had created a music technology company, which was Groove Shark, a music streaming service, a media company, just because I wanted to be a journalist, so I hired myself. and I had began this theory that you could build a technology company from anywhere, because the University of Florida is in Gainesville, Florida. It's a town of 100,000 people. 50,000 of them are students. And it's not Silicon Valley. It's not Boston. It's not California. It's not even Boulder or Denver. There was absolutely nothing, but I had access to Wikipedia and the internet and YouTube. And so how did I learn accounting? YouTube. How did I learn about the music industry? Wikipedia and books and YouTube. Pretty much we built that technology company by watching tutorials, reading the manual, reading on Wikipedia, and just applying it. After I finished my university, I started traveling throughout Latin America to meet entrepreneurs and to meet investors and to see if it was really possible to build a technology company from outside of Silicon Valley. And being a journalist really helped, because then I could get into conferences, expensive conferences for free as a journalist. And people want to meet with me because I was unknown. So like people would meet with me because I would send them an email and say, hey, I'm in your town for X amount of days. Would you be up for an interview? And that's when I started meeting amazing entrepreneurs traveling throughout Latin America. I think that's where I met Johanna too, in Startup Chile many, many years ago. And there was a point that I said, all right, cool. So it is possible. Let me prove and let me do it myself. And I built an ad network with an engineering team in Latin America. And we did business and we raised money in the US. We became the third largest ad network for mobile web traffic after Google and Facebook. I showed that you can build a global product from Latin America. And that was OnSwipe. That's a company that I went through Techstars in 2011, the Techstars New York Accelerator. And it was in that program that I discovered the philosophy of give first, which is the main value that Techstars has. Give first without expecting anything in return. And if everybody does that, you just create a better world. And mentorship, which is very important. And I said, you know what, this is cool. Like I like running companies, but I also want to help other entrepreneurs. And so I started helping entrepreneurs in New York and entrepreneurs in Latin America as a mentor, then as an advisor. And then I saw how successful they were, not because of me, they're just great entrepreneurs. And many of them went on to create multi-billion-dollar companies. And that's when I did the math and I said, well, if I had invested in their companies, I would do a lot better than what I'm doing with my own company because they're better entrepreneurs. So in 2013, I decided to become a full-time investor. I didn't have a lot of money. Actually, I had no money. So what I did is I stopped paying rent in New York and stopped paying taxes in New York because I moved out of New York. And with all that savings, I started investing in a few companies, learning how to do that. Then I partnered up with development banks, governments to set up accelerators and programs for entrepreneurs. And over 7 years, I built up a portfolio of 85 companies. And these companies, because the internet allows you to sell anywhere and live anywhere, the one thing that they were having problems with across the board is it wasn't even access to capital. It was access to engineering talent. And if we go back to the beginning of the story of how it's difficult or education set up to filter people out rather than to make it accessible to more people, you see this problem where there's very few minorities in Silicon Valley in software engineering roles, women. It's not very inclusive. And yet at the same time, companies complain that there's not enough engineers. And so that's why I created the nonprofit coderice.org, was to help kids like myself that didn't have the fortune and the privilege to be able to migrate to the US, to be able to learn how to create technology from Latin America and make their lives better. Because now it doesn't matter your last name, what school you went to. I was able to raise $20 million of venture capital, and nobody asked me if I was an engineer or not. Nobody asked me where I was from. I just showed them my product. I had my growth. They liked it. I got money. But had I stayed in Latin America and had I wanted to create a business, like create a bank, Well, you need to be wealthy. You need to have family with the right last name and the right contacts. If I wanted to create any business, it required connections and capital. But if I wanted to create software, you just need an internet connection and a computer. And so that's why we started CodeRice, to help kids initially in Medellin. And then eventually CodeRice started doing programs for all ages. So now we have programs for kids as young as 7 years old, all the way to adults as old as there's no limit. Because now we have a program called Holberton School that teaches computer science in 9 months in a way that is inclusive, not the way that I live, where they're proactively looking to exclude people. And the way that we do it with Holberton is if you go through the program, you don't pay anything until you get a high paying job. And it lasts 9 months, and we're seeing people land really high paying jobs, both in Colombia and in the US. They get higher paying jobs than if you had gone through traditional school for 4 or 5 years. And now you start to see the demand of startups where I was investing, hiring initially the kids that I was teaching how to code. And then those kids, they grow up, they work for these companies, then they create their own companies, and they hire the new generation of people that just learn how to code. And it creates this flywheel of opportunity and upward social mobility where you live, your background, your last name doesn't really matter. And that's when I joined Techstars last year to take it a step further, because what I was doing, was limited in scale. But with Techstars, we're investing about 500 companies per year, and companies from all over the world. It doesn't matter where you're at. We just want to find the best founders. And yeah, that's a brief yet a little bit long background.
Next up on this How to Be the Difference Best Of, we have Eder Hogan, and he's going to talk to us about his incredible journey from being homeless as a kid in the streets of Medellin, Colombia in the 80s to becoming an award-winning serial entrepreneur. As Johanna laughs at me, how was the pronunciation on Eder's name?
Very sweet. It's Olgin, Eder Olgin. But I love how you pronounce all these names in Spanish anyway. And yes, this man is super inspirational. I read his book before meeting him. And when I met him, yes, basically I just jumped into his arms with a huge hug, because he's just beautiful human being and super inspirational life story.
What are the common principles of marketing and sales?
Well, the common denominator is always the same, right? It's all about providing the right message to the right audience using the right advertising vehicle. The challenge is, as simple as that sounds, it is not very simple. Most companies do not understand who their perfect audience is. So that creates, right off the gate, it creates a problem. So understanding and aligning those things, right? Having the right message, what is the right value proposition for the brand, who is the right audience, and what is the right advertising vehicle to deliver that message. When you kind of begin to put all those pieces together, you realize audiences are segmented. There's so many different channels of communication. You have email marketing, you have SEO, you have social media platforms, you have television, newspapers, there's all these different things. So kind of narrowing down everything to the basics is really kind of the common denominator of both sales and marketing, which is understanding, what is that your product or service, what is the problem that is solving? Who is the right audience that you want to communicate this with? What is the simple message that you can use, the right advertising vehicle, and the right time to deliver that message? Once you begin to kind of put all these different pieces together and you begin to see the misalignments, that's when you have an aha moment and you think, oh, we're trying to sell this to the wrong audience. And you'll be surprised. Large companies that I have conversations with, and I show them who their followers are on social media, or I show them people who are responded to their ads, and they never thought there would be an audience for them. And sometimes you discover new audiences as you go through this process. You discover that there are certain groups of people that are actually really interested in your product that you never thought of them as your ideal audience. Same thing with different platforms. Since there's so many platforms now, there's a new social media platform every couple of years. There's all these different ways of communicating. Knowing how to use those platforms and how to use them to communicate with your audiences in an effective manner are kind of the common ways of solving these issues with marketing and aligning both the concept of sales and marketing together.
Really good one. And then going back to, well, the beginning of your story, you said it's all about sales skills. And a lot of our audience is at university and probably not necessarily being told and learning about sales. What would be your advice for them? How do you improve your sales skills? Because I know a lot of people, sometimes myself as well, is I'm not really good at selling. How do you encourage that? How do you train those skills, which are fundamental, I agree with you, for any success in any career?
Yeah, I think we're all selling ourselves all the time. We sell ourselves to our significant others when we're dating. We try to convince them we're the right choice. We sell ourselves to our friends, our ideas to other people. We sell them in the movies that we liked. We sell them on things that we believe are great for them. So it's a normal part of life. I think the difference is learning a different skill set, which is more about open communication and listening. When I was growing up, the whole idea of being a good salesman is someone who could talk a lot, and everyone that could really just talk for a long time nonstop, everybody thought, oh, he's going to be a good salesman. And I think that has shifted a lot. I think it's more about listening with intent and learning how to listen for specific things, which is really the basics of what I mentioned earlier about being a professional problem solver. When you're listening to clients, to prospects, to people that you want to do business with, it's all about identifying those specific problems and thinking about, can I offer a solution? The truth is sometimes it may not be the case, and you may be like, oh, that's great, but unfortunately, I'm not going to be the person who can help you. But when you listen with intent and you begin to understand that, that's really the basics of providing a solution for someone. And that's the basics of being a good salesperson. It's more about leading the conversation, listening, and learning how to uncover specific needs, because that's how you realize, can I offer a solution to this person? Yes or no? Are we aligned in terms of everything pertaining timelines or money or the scope of the work that needs to be done, or whatever the case may be? But it's all about that level of communication when you open yourself to kind of understand their needs and their potential problems, and then seeing how you can provide a solution to them.
Our next guest is Irene Arias Hoffman. She's the CEO of the IDB Lab, which is part of the Inter-American Development Bank. She's a super interesting woman that I have actually admired for years and years. She's going to tell us about her interest in development and also a career in public versus private sector. Very, very interesting.
Definitely. Absolutely. And I remember this episode clearly because we went in with one idea and then we left with 3 careers worth of information and work and life. And it was absolutely brilliant. So let's jump into Irene.
What was that moment where you actually started getting interested? You talk a little bit about the changes happening in Europe at that time, that you got actually that moment where you started getting interested in helping other people in the developing world, and that this career was for you. Is there a story there that you can share with us?
I want to think that I was raised in an environment where compassion is a big thing and doing good in general. So I think we had sort of those values in the family to begin with. But I had also been exposed to many different realities because of the ability to travel, thanks to my dad's job in the airline industry, and seen the reality very quickly different places where living conditions were so different, and went to different parts of Latin America, even at the age of 8, 9, and seeing the contrast, I think inevitably starts leaving something right in you of trying to do something about it. And what I probably didn't know was how important it was for me to be able to do that, but also doing it again with a sense of business as well. So it's not enough that doing good in a kind of just pure charitable way if it's not sustainable, for example. No. So I think the drive to do good. I even remember when I was doing my first communion, I was actually 6 because I'm the youngest of 4, and we're 1 year apart. So my sister, who was 7 at the time, and I did it together. So it was, at least for Spanish standards, it was a little early, but I had to say what I committed to do, and I was not very tall and the youngest of the kids, but I stood up and I said I want to help others, and but I think it's something that was again very much in the way that we were raised, and my other siblings have also devoted a lot of time in terms of doing a lot of work that has some kind of social impact. So that was there from the very beginning. I just didn't know how it would turn out, how I would do it in a way that also made sense to me and that I thought was effective. And when I discovered and slowly gravitated towards the world of development finance and working through the private sector to solve development challenges, is where I thought that, okay, the pieces are sort of, those two pieces fit together for me. And I do a lot of work now, certainly on the innovation space and tech, where we partner with governments, but having a foot with the private sector gives that sense of having the discipline and the business drivers to make things happen, and the momentum and the traction to see results that sometimes it's harder to see on the public side. So it's a combination that have been really my sweet spot, and simply because I think it's a way of being effective.
There's something that's very interesting, and it's about that correlation you just mentioned between private and public sector. What would you say for people that have no idea about how that works? What is it like to be in the public sector and then move into the private sector?
The incentives are very different. I think you see people with a huge sense of public side, of course, and that's often very, very motivating. And during the pandemic, it's been incredible. We've seen it in so many different public institutions, how they've responded, and they've opened up to partner with us, to partner with other players in the private sector. In the private sector, you have a sense of risk-taking and of business results that helps focus. And I think, this world where we are in, we have one foot on the public side and one in the private side is really ideal, because you get the best of both. And working, for example, within the private sector, there are also huge differences, right, between more of the entrepreneurial startup community and the more corporate world of the private sector, including the financial sector. I started my career more, supporting small enterprises indirectly, but I had never, like today, spent so much time embedded in the entrepreneurial community and entrepreneurs that are mostly tech-driven and are trying mostly to do disruptive innovation, turning sort of complex and expensive things into things that are simple and that people can access. And so within the private sector, I think one has to also understand those differences and the agility that you get and the spirit of innovation and changing the world that you get when you interact with entrepreneurs versus the more established corporate sector, where sometimes you do have intrapreneurs or, people obviously with a lot of an innovation spirit within that, but for the most part, it's a very different culture. So I think for anyone wondering, whether to, work with or start in the private sector, I think knowing yourself and knowing what drives you, it's very, very important to maybe test more of an entrepreneurial journey or getting more into the corporate world.
Next up, we have Robbie J Frey. He is a professional inceptionist. I remember that actually from the podcast, but he also has his own show, and he's the host of that show, The Robbie Frey Show. And myself and Johanna had a lovely conversation with him way back at episode 13. I suppose, like, when we're talking about habits, I believe you said that the most important thing about creativity is that it is a habit. Is that correct?
I think that creativity is I'm missing a big piece, which is the and, which is like the bridge or the moment between the ma. The Japanese expression, it's not the two sounds, it's the space between the sound. It's not the sound, it's the silence. So if you take innovation and creativity, I now think you have to have innovation before creativity. It's not creativity and innovation. So if we're looking like, literally evolutionary speaking, the egg is before the chicken. There's no argument. It's the egg and then the chicken. So it's not the chicken before the egg, it's the egg. So in this sense, the egg is innovation, which means that you have a problem in your life. You try to think of how to solve it and you do something about it, right? But whenever you do something, if it's new, the bridge between the two is the anxiety. It's that the newer the thing you do, the more angst, the more cognitive dissonance, the more psychological pressure you're under to do something. It's easy to do the same thing over and over again. But once you have a problem, because you're doing something, so you're actually doing something in your life, right? You have to be doing something to generate the problem. That's when your creativity kicks in. How am I going to solve this? Okay, I will try this, this, and this. So then the only way to actually do that is to innovate, is to actually do something. So the action precedes the creativity, and the creativity is how you solve it or what pieces you put together. And then the innovation is what allows you to try to do new things, and the sequence continues. So if you're constantly doing the same thing as a drone, you're not thinking about problems, you're not conscious of what's going on, so there's no creativity and there's no innovation. The moment you see a problem or you start doing something is because you came to a roadblock and you understood that there's a problem there. And then it's just how far you're willing to go to solve the problems. And then once you get to another level, of course, you guys will get there at one point with your podcast. You'll be like, we've been doing the same thing. We need to take it to the next level. But that's forced creativity, which is extremely hard. It's really, really hard when you get good at something to take it to the next level because you have no idea what that next level is. And the amount of anxiety it brings with it to accept that it might not work and to give up something you've been doing requires a high level of innovation. So that's how I think they both combine is you need the and. It's innovation and sports, innovation and podcasting, creativity and emotional connection, creativity and family, creativity and psychology. So you always need the bridge between two words that gives it that allows you to connect and advance forward, if that makes any sense.
It does. And I suppose like you've gone through this already with a big leap, moving to Colombia and also then starting a podcast in a language that, wasn't your native tongue. Like, so was that one an example of how you needed creativity and innovation?
I would say it's, how to explain that one? I believe in that sense. Right now, I would say yes, where I'm at now, where I'm trying to take the podcast now. But in the previous sense, and I think a person, if anybody wants to listen, Naval Ravikant, who's one of the most marvelous thinkers at this point in time, in the way he's able to articulate in such short pieces his information and how he sees the world. But it's the ignorance. It was all ignorance. It was luck and ignorance. And I think ignorance is a huge benefit. Is to say, when I moved to Colombia, I had no idea what I was going to do, what I was getting into. So it was just a move when the ignorance is so high sometimes that it permits you to take these, I guess what you can call salto cuánticos or quantum jumps, because you don't know the risks. So I think when you go into a world you have no idea about, it's much easier to do something because you don't understand what you're doing. So I think it was much easier because there was no one doing the podcast. You know, I wasn't conscious of myself. I didn't care in one sense. So the ignorance in the podcasting world allowed me to take that first jump. And he says, Naval Ravikant says, it helps a lot to not know what you're doing when you try something new. So I never studied journalism. The first podcast, I took a dictaphone, a little thing I bought at a store and put it on a dining room table in this restaurant. and I was like, shit, this is not going to work. But myself and Jonathan Taru, my first guest, who was episode 6, we talked for approximately 3.5 hours about books, about life. And so I said, okay, you can have a conversation. I felt good. He kept talking. I kept talking. I learned a lot. So long form podcast in Spanish is possible, but I have to take a course in Udemy on how to make a podcast. So then I went and took a course on podcasting, and that's when I learned how to do it. But now in this sense, Paul, it's been 5 years, and I told myself, if I don't take the podcast to the next level, I'm going to kill it. And so now the podcast, I'm sending audios daily, pieces from my podcast to like 500 people through WhatsApp. It's become a business. We're going to launch with 6 different companies. Just signed a contract with a huge automation company in Colombia that automates WhatsApp to send the messages to the businesses. Lawyers are getting involved in now. And now I'm full podcast Tuesday, Thursday. Now it's like I'm trying to focus in Chile, Argentina, Uruguay, expand all of Latin to get more of an audience, to give my Colombian audience more of a perspective of what's happening elsewhere. So this is more of a forced jump versus the other one was just an ignorant jump.
Our next guest is David Reimer. He is the CEO of Exco Group in the US. It used to be called Merrick back then when we interviewed him. David, essentially what they do is matching CEOs or the independent directors with companies. And he's going to be telling us a lot of really great stuff about the importance of mentorship, how to find a mentor, different criteria for bringing a CEO into your business. Really, really inspiring episode. Let's listen to David.
Why is mentorship so important? Are they just only for CEOs or for people listening to us? How do you find a mentor?
Yeah, I think mentorship can apply at every level in your career. Right? And so the work we do is pretty focused at the senior levels of organizations, and often big organizations or fast scaling startups. Having said that, a coach is somebody, I'll make a slight distinction between coach and mentor here. A coach is often somebody who will come and they ask you good questions that force you to step back and think from angles that you would not have otherwise considered necessarily. A mentor should do that, but a mentor needs to bring some other things to the table. And some of the things that a mentor needs to bring are a network of people that they can connect you with to help you answer some of those questions if you genuinely don't know the answer. B, a mentor is somebody who should be able to sometimes not just ask a question, but say to you, honestly, if I were your boss sitting on the other side of the table and you said that to me, I'd probably fire you. Now, I want you to be successful, but let's take apart what you just said and let's put it back together differently. So a mentor is somebody who has a personal interest in you, a personal stake in you, is probably willing to take some level of career risk on you, but does more than just ask questions. They're going to push back and push back usefully.
And I suppose, David, like you know, Exco gathers all these kind of really important CEOs, these people, really valuable talent and insight that they can pass on to other people. How do you identify that? And like, do you have a criteria, or how difficult is it to find that?
We do have criteria. It is, I hesitate to say it's not difficult, because for many years it was the most difficult thing. I think we've become much better at parsing it. We used to interview 17 or 18 CEOs for every one that we would bring on. That's probably down to 8 or 9 to 1 today, because we've gotten better at just filtering earlier. And I sometimes tell the story that you know, I've literally never met a CEO who has not said developing people was my favorite part of the job. But you look over their shoulder and sometimes there's this trail of dead bodies behind them where, you know, you can see the people they stepped on. It's harder to see the people they developed. And then those are the leaders who we don't spend any time really talking to about becoming a mentor beyond that first conversation. And what we look for are people who actually have, in sports parlance, there's a phrase, a coaching tree, right? And it's the great head coach who you can actually look around any league and see the other coaches that started out as junior employees working for that coach. That's a coaching tree. We look for that with CEOs who want to become mentors. Who are the people you've groomed? Where are they? Do they all look like you? Do they all sound like you? Or are they all in the same, you know, company? Or have you sort of seeded the world with better leaders? That's a basis we can work with to help create more and better leaders elsewhere.
Yes, and during the years at the Intern Group, we've had some of the Exco mentors supporting us throughout the journey. I'm just thinking, if I'm a student and I'd like to have a mentor, how do I ask for it? How do I find it? Do I pay for a mentorship? Tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, it's a great question, because I think it can be uncomfortable on both sides, right? As somebody who is mentoring, you don't really want to say, hey, look, you know, Paul, would you mind if I was your mentor? What if Paul says no? That would hurt that would hurt my feelings. And at the same time, Johanna, you know, do you walk up to somebody who's a relative stranger and say, I really admire you, would you be my mentor? We don't, in most cultures, actually know what that word means. So what I would say is almost take the word mentor off the table, tuck it in the desk, right? And it's more a case of if there's somebody you greatly respect, and whose advice you would listen to. You don't just want their network, right? It's not that kind of relationship. It's someone whose advice you would truly listen to. Approach them and say, could we have a cup of coffee? Can I just pick your brain for a few minutes? And start small. And in that conversation, you know, go in with a plan. And by a plan, again, I don't mean you have to be overly structured, but what is it? Is it just that you admire them? Is there something you want to get their opinion on? And the see how that first conversation goes. They'll want to know about you. You should ask about them. People like to know. It doesn't matter how accomplished they are. They like to know that you are interested in them and their story. So ask questions yourself. And, you know, if that conversation goes well, really the question, the next question or the closing question becomes, look, I want to be incredibly respectful of your time, but would you mind if maybe once a quarter we could sit down? I've learned 5 things today that I didn't come in here knowing. Are you open to that? And you know, people will rarely say no to that, because it also feels good on the other side of the table. You helped somebody. And honestly, it wasn't that hard. It was a conversation. And you start to invest in one another. And so there's a very slow, organic model there that is just about caring about the person on the other side of the table and being willing to listen to them. And that, I believe, is how you find a mentor. And it's not a mentor you pay for.
And closing our very special of the last year is Enzo Cavalier. He's an investment associate at Reach Capital, and he also has a show, a podcast show, and a company actually that really provides amazing content for startups and anyone interested in entrepreneurship, called Startupiable. Enzo comes and tell us in this show about entering in venture capital, what actually are his non-negotiable, and some skills for you to succeed in the 21st century. Enjoy it.
What for you personally is a non-negotiable? Like, what's non-negotiable for you?
That's a great question. I think I probably divide it in two, but it's the same. One is working in something I'm passionate about. And I've received this feedback that from a lot of people that told me, like, when you are working in something that you like, it actually, like, it's super like clear, right? When it's something you love, it's like you kill it. When it's you like it, it's super clear. I also have to work because obviously work has sometimes work that you don't love to do. And connected to that is just working with people I really like. And in terms of culture, I've worked in companies that I didn't love the culture, and I really didn't. I can say I probably didn't. I did a good job. I didn't do my best job. I think it's like when you are in a place where you feel safe and connected, and people are empathetic, etc. And like just good leadership and mentorship. I think that sparks a lot in you. And at least in my career, I try to be in places where I can find that.
What skills do you look for in your team members when you hire, or in other words, what are those skills to succeed in this century?
You mean in general or in the venture capital industry?
No, in general it can be. And if there is anyone that is more specific for venture capital, yes, as well.
I'd say probably the first one is curiosity. I love the guys from Platzi, Colombia, that have this phrase, never stop learning. I think that's a good summary of that. I think in this world, if you stop learning, you're probably just gonna be able to improve it. Like, things are changing so fast. And actually that's also one of like the critics of education, which is like, go 5 years to university, study like a curriculum from 10 years ago. Then you go to the market and obviously nothing of what you studied is applicable, right? Because things are going so fast. So I think that's something that people need to develop. And I think it's hard because some people have it natural, some people have to learn it or just even push themselves. But I think in this knowledge economy, it's super key. And regardless of the place you are working at, if you're in technology or a doctor or an engineer, etc., I think it applies for everything. The second one, and I think it's a bit tricky, is communication skills. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you are like the best public speaker. It could be like just be a good writer. Because I know there's different personalities. Some people are more shy, more afraid of speaking in public, etc. But I think in a world where there's so much information, and especially in a remote world when there's so much more information and less personal contact, being able to communicate well in a succinct way, concise, making your communication even enjoyable, that's like super, super good. And once again, I think that applies for everything, where you're working internally, or you're writing a blog post, or you're writing an investment memo, etc. And the third one, which is and applies much more to probably venture capital, and that was a huge find for me, is, I mean, if you want to do venture capital, you have to like to sell. And it sounds a bit odd, but I've even heard this in a podcast from a super famous investor called Bill Gurley from Benchmark, which is a huge VC firm in the US. I think backed, for example, Uber at the beginning. And he in this podcast, actually this podcast by Harry Stevens, which I mentioned at the beginning, he says, like, how do you know if someone wants to be actually a VC? Or it's not just because of, obviously, VCs are now like celebrities. They appear in Forbes, Midas, etc. in those lists. And he says, like, because they like to sell. And the job of VC is a lot of selling, like in two fronts. One is selling yourself to the investors that are going to put money into your fund. and the other one is selling your partnership to entrepreneurs, right? Okay, I'm the best investor because X, Y, and Z. And that has a lot of just building relationships, being genuine with people, thinking that if you're not investing in a founder right now because you don't like the company or the team or whatever, you have to stay in good terms because that might come back to you in a few years when probably the company just grew a lot, or the founder just closed his company but launched a new company and now he's raising money and it's a rocket ship and you want to invest in it. But if you were too short thinker in terms of the relationship and you say, okay, I don't want to invest, and you are super not humble at all, etc., and then that's going to come back to you eventually. So I think this business in venture capital is a lot about relationships, and it's selling, just being genuine, etc.
And that is it for part 2 of our best of 2021 or 2022 now. Can you believe that?
Yes, absolutely. I can believe it. With all the best energy, with a very long list of New Year resolutions. How is your New Year resolution list?
It's extensive. It's a long, extensive list, and it's got the same things on it as it did last year. What's on your list?
Yes. Some things repeat for whatever reason. But yes, it's very challenging. Is not challenging. Is exciting. It's exciting. I can feel it that this year is going to be absolutely amazing. Already is.
Absolutely, yes. This year will be far different to the last 2 years. Hopefully, fingers crossed. Thank you for joining me over the course of the year, Johanna. I love your company, and a massive thank you to all the guests. And looking forward to the future guests who don't yet exist, but will soon in the future for our podcast.
Absolutely. And yes, a very, very happy New Year to everyone listening. Get your New Year's resolution and actually do them throughout the year. And we'll hear you next time. You can, in the meantime, find us at howtobethedifference@theintentgroup.com or at the Intent Group. And until next time.
Best of luck. See you. Thanks for listening. Good luck. Bye.
Bye.